I watched in complete disbelief as Corinne Sullivan, our HOA vice president, stood in my backyard at 6 in the morning with a wicker basket. She was not watering plants. She was not checking for violations. She was stealing my 12-year-old son's tomatoes and peppers that he had been growing for 3 months. When I confronted her, she looked me straight in the eye and said the vegetables belonged to the community now. 20 minutes later, she was on the phone with 911, claiming I had threatened her family. The police arrived, and somehow I became the villain in my own backyard. But Corinne made one critical mistake that morning. She had no idea who she was dealing with. She had no idea how far a father would go to protect his son's dreams. And she definitely had no idea that I was about to expose her entire web of lies and theft that had been terrorizing our neighborhood for years. My son Marcus is 12 years old, and he has the biggest heart of any kid I know. 3 months ago, he came home from school buzzing with excitement about his science fair project. He wanted to grow his own vegetables from seed and document the entire process. Not just any vegetables, but the ones his grandmother used to grow in Puerto Rico before she passed away. I helped him file the proper paperwork with our HOA. Yes, even for a small garden we needed permits in our neighborhood. Maple Ridge Estates has rules for everything. The color of your mailbox, the height of your grass, even the type of flowers you can plant in your front yard. But I wanted to support my son's project, so I did everything by the book. Marcus chose a small corner of our backyard, right next to the fence. He planted tomatoes, bell peppers, and herbs. Every single morning before school, he would wake up at 6:30 to water his plants and check for new growth. He kept a journal with pictures and measurements. He was so proud of those plants. Our neighborhood is quiet, mostly families with kids and a few retirees. The HOA board consists of 5 people, and Corinne Sullivan is the vice president. She lives 3 houses down from us in a large colonial with perfect landscaping. She has been on the board for 4 years, and everyone knows she takes her position very seriously. Maybe too seriously. Corinne has a daughter named Madison who is the same age as Marcus. They go to the same school but different classes. Madison is involved in every activity, every competition, every opportunity to shine. Corinne makes sure of that. I had no problems with Corinne until that morning in late September. I woke up early to let our dog out, and I saw movement in our backyard. At first, I thought it might be a deer or a raccoon getting into the garden. But when I looked closer through the kitchen window, I saw a person crouched down among Marcus's plants. It was Corinne Sullivan, and she had a wicker basket in her hands. She was carefully picking the ripest tomatoes and peppers, examining each one like she was shopping at a farmer's market. She moved with purpose, not like someone who was just curious or checking on things. She was harvesting my son's vegetables. I watched for almost 5 minutes, thinking there had to be some reasonable explanation. Maybe she was checking for pests. Maybe she was helping with something I had forgotten about. But then she stood up with her basket full of my son's produce and started walking toward the gate. That is when I realized what was happening. Corinne Sullivan was stealing from my 12-year-old son. I rushed outside in my pajamas and slippers, my heart pounding with anger and disbelief. "Corinne, what are you doing?" She turned around calmly like she had been expecting me. "Oh, good morning. I was just managing the community garden space." "Community garden space? This is my son's project. These are his vegetables." Corinne smiled in a way that made my skin crawl. Actually, according to HOA guidelines, any garden visible from public areas becomes community property. These plants are creating maintenance issues, and I am authorized to address them. I stared at her, holding a basket full of my son's vegetables, talking about authorization and maintenance issues. She was not embarrassed. She was not apologetic. She was acting like she had every right to be there. "Put those back," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Those vegetables belong to my son. He has been growing them for his school project." Corinne shook her head. "I am afraid that is not how this works. I have been monitoring this situation for weeks, and I have decided to redistribute these vegetables to families who can better utilize them." Redistribute. She was talking about stealing like it was some kind of community service program. "You need to leave my property right now," I said, stepping closer. "And you need to put those vegetables back where you found them." Corinne clutched the basket tighter and backed toward the gate. "I will not be intimidated by your aggressive behavior. I am acting within my authority as an HOA representative." She walked out of my backyard with my son's vegetables, leaving me standing there in complete shock. I had just witnessed the most brazen act of theft I had ever seen, and the thief was justifying it with HOA policy. I was not going to let Corinne walk away with my son's vegetables. I marched straight to her house, still in my pajamas, and rang the doorbell. When she answered, I could see the wicker basket sitting on her kitchen counter through the open door. "I want those vegetables back right now," I said. Corinne opened the door wider and gestured for me to look inside. "As you can see, I am already putting these vegetables to good use. I am preparing them for a proper educational demonstration." She had my son's tomatoes and peppers laid out on her counter like she was about to start cooking. Some of them were already washed and sliced. "Educational demonstration?" I asked. "Yes, my daughter Madison is participating in a school agriculture project, and these vegetables will provide excellent examples of proper growing techniques." My blood started to boil. Not only had Corinne stolen my son's vegetables, but she was planning to use them for her own daughter's school project. She was going to let Madison take credit for Marcus's 3 months of hard work. "You cannot be serious," I said. "Those vegetables belong to Marcus. He grew them from seeds. He has been documenting everything for his science fair project." Corinne waved her hand dismissively. "Marcus can start over. Children need to learn that not every project works out as planned. This is a valuable lesson for him." "A valuable lesson you stole from my son." "I did not steal anything. I exercised my authority as HOA vice president to address a community maintenance issue. The garden was attracting pests and creating visual pollution." I looked at her perfect lawn, her trimmed hedges, her spotless driveway. Visual pollution. It is a small vegetable garden. Small problems become big problems if they are not addressed promptly. I have been monitoring the situation, and I decided to take action before it got out of hand. The way she talked about my son's garden like it was some kind of neighborhood menace made me furious. "You had no right to take anything from my property. I am calling the police." Corinne laughed, actually laughed. "Go ahead and call them. I will be happy to explain how you are harassing a neighborhood volunteer who is trying to maintain community standards." "Harassing? You are the one who trespassed on my property." "I was performing my duties as an elected HOA representative. You are the one who followed me to my home and are now threatening me on my own doorstep." I realized that Corinne was twisting everything around, making herself the victim, but I was not going to back down. "I want those vegetables back, and I want you to stay away from my property." "I am afraid that is not going to happen. These vegetables are being put to better use, and I will continue to monitor your property for any future violations." By this time, Our raised voices had attracted the attention of other neighbors. Mrs. Chen from next door came out to see what was happening. Mr. Rodriguez from across the street was watching from his front porch. "Is everything okay?" Mrs. Chen asked. "Everything is fine," Karen said in her sweetest voice. "Just a little misunderstanding about garden maintenance." "She stole my son's vegetables," I said, pointing at the basket on her counter. Mrs. Chen looked confused. "Stole vegetables?" "I removed some overgrown plants that were creating pest problems," Karen explained. "It is all part of my HOA responsibilities." "That is not true," I said. "She trespassed on my property and took vegetables that my son has been growing for months." Mr. Rodriguez walked over to join the conversation. "What kind of vegetables?" "Tomatoes and peppers," I said. "My son Marcus has been growing them for his science fair project." "And I am using them for my daughter's school project," Karen said. "They will be much better utilized in a proper educational setting." "Your daughter did not grow those vegetables," I said. "Marcus did." Karen pulled out her phone. "I think this conversation has gone far enough. You are on my property, raising your voice and making false accusations. I am calling the police." "False accusations. Everyone can see the vegetables on your counter." "I am calling 911 right now," Karen said, dialing the number. "I need to report a neighbor who is harassing me and making threats." I could not believe what I was hearing. Karen was actually calling the police on me for trying to get my son's stolen vegetables back. 911, what is your emergency?" I could hear the dispatcher through Karen's phone. "Yes, I need police assistance. I have a neighbor who has come to my house and is threatening me. He is very aggressive and I am afraid for my safety." Threatening her? I had not threatened anyone. I had asked for my son's vegetables back. "The police are on their way," Karen said, hanging up the phone. "I suggest you go back to your house and wait for them there." "I am not going anywhere until I get those vegetables back." Karen shook her head. "You are making a very big mistake." In the distance, I could hear sirens approaching. I realized that this situation had spiraled completely out of control. Karen had stolen from my son, and somehow I was about to be treated like the criminal. 2 police officers arrived within minutes. Officer Martinez was tall and serious-looking, while Officer Thompson was younger and seemed more aprotic. Karen immediately went into full victim mode. "Thank you for coming so quickly," she said, her voice shaking like she was terrified. "This man came to my house and started yelling at me. He has been very aggressive and threatening." Officer Martinez looked at me standing there in my pajamas and slippers, then at Karen in her perfect morning outfit. "Sir, what is your name?" "David Chen," I said. "I live 3 houses down. This woman trespassed on my property this morning and stole vegetables from my son's garden." "Stole vegetables?" Officer Thompson asked. "I did not steal anything," Karen said quickly. "I am the HOA vice president, and I was addressing a community maintenance issue. This garden was attracting pests and violating our neighborhood standards." Officer Martinez looked confused. "Ma'am, can you show me these vegetables?" "I am afraid I cannot," Karen said. "I already disposed of them properly. They were rotting and creating health hazards." My jaw dropped. "Disposed of them? They were perfect. You had them on your counter 20 minutes ago." "Sir, please calm down," Officer Martinez said. "Ma'am, do you have any documentation of this HOA authority you mentioned?" Karen disappeared into her house and came back with a folder full of papers. "Here are the HOA bylaws and regulations. As you can see, I have full authority to address community maintenance issues and remove hazardous materials. Officer Thompson took the papers and started reading. The documents looked official, with letterheads and signatures. These seem to give you authority over community property maintenance. That is right, Karen said. The garden in question was visible from the street and was creating pest problems. I had complaints from multiple neighbors. What neighbors? I asked. Name one neighbor who complained. I am not required to reveal the names of residents who report violations, Karen said. That information is confidential. Officer Martinez turned to me. Sir, did you have permission to plant this garden? Yes, I filed all the proper paperwork with the HOA 3 months ago. I have copies of everything. Can you show us this paperwork? Officer Thompson asked. It is in my house. I can get it right now. We walked to my house, and I showed the officers Marcus's garden. Even with some vegetables missing, it was clearly a small, well-maintained plot. I brought out the folder with all our permits and documentation. As you can see, I said, we followed all the rules. We got approval for the garden, we stayed within the size limits, and we have been maintaining it properly. Officer Martinez looked at the paperwork, then at Karen. Ma'am, these documents appear to show that Mr. Chen had permission for this garden. Permission can be revoked if the garden becomes a maintenance issue, Karen said. I have been monitoring the situation for weeks, and I decided that action was necessary. But you said you disposed of the vegetables, Officer Thompson said. If they were evidence of a maintenance problem, should you not have documented that? Karen looked flustered for the first time. I documented everything in my HOA reports. The vegetables were attracting insects and creating odors. There were no insects, I said. There were no odors. The vegetables were perfectly healthy. Sir, this appears to be a civil matter between neighbors, Officer Martinez said. We suggest you work this out through your HOA procedures. But she trespassed on my property, I said. She took my son's vegetables without permission. Ma'am, did you enter Mr. Chen's property without permission? Officer Thompson asked. I entered community property in my capacity as an HOA representative, Karen said. I have authority to inspect and maintain all community areas. This is not community property, I said. This is my backyard. Officer Martinez sighed. Like I said, this seems like a civil matter. We recommend that you both follow proper HOA procedures to resolve this dispute. What about the theft? I asked. If you believe a crime has been committed, you can file a report, Officer Martinez said. But this appears to be a disagreement about property management and HOA authority. The officers left, and I stood in my backyard feeling completely defeated. Karen had stolen my son's vegetables, called the police on me, and somehow made me look like the problem. She had manipulated the entire situation to her advantage. But as I watched Karen walk back to her house with a smug smile on her face, I realized something important. She had made a mistake. She had underestimated me, and she had left a trail of lies that I could follow. It was time to find out exactly what kind of authority Karen Sullivan really had. When Marcus came home from school that afternoon, my heart broke watching his face when he saw his garden. Half of his vegetables were gone, and he could not understand why. Dad, what happened to my tomatoes? He asked, kneeling down next to the plants. Someone took them, son, but we are going to figure this out. Took them? Why would someone take my vegetables? I sat down next to him in the dirt. Sometimes adults make bad choices, Marcus, but I promise you we are going to make this right. That night after Marcus went to bed, I started investigating. I pulled out every piece of HOA documentation I had received over the past 4 years. I read through the bylaws, the regulations, the meeting minutes, everything. What I found was interesting. Corinne Sullivan was indeed the HOA vice president, but her authority was much more limited than she had claimed. She could not remove property from private yards. She could not dispose of community property without board approval, and she definitely could not redistribute anything to other families. I decided to contact other neighbors to see if anyone else had experienced problems with Corinne. I started with Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who lived 2 streets over. "Oh, you are having trouble with Corinne too," Mrs. Patterson said when I called her. "She came into my yard last month and cut down my rose bushes, said they were growing too close to the sidewalk." "Did she have authority to do that?" "I do not think so. I planted those roses 15 years ago, and they never bothered anyone. But Corinne said she had complaints and that the bushes were a safety hazard." Mrs. Patterson was not the only one. Over the next few days, I talked to 8 different neighbors who had similar stories. Corinne had removed decorations, trimmed trees, and even taken items from front porches. She always claimed HOA authority, and she always had some official-sounding justification. But the most interesting conversation was with Jim Rodriguez, who lived across the street from Corinne. "I have been wondering when someone would finally challenge her," Jim said. "Corinne has been operating like she owns this entire neighborhood for over a year." "What do you mean?" "She collects HOA fees for services that never happen. She approves and denies requests without consulting the other board members. She even threatened to fine my wife for parking in our own driveway." "Have you reported this to the other board members?" Jim laughed. "That is the problem. Corinne controls all the communication. She sends out the meeting notices, she takes the minutes, she handles all the correspondence. The other board members only hear what Corinne wants them to hear." This was bigger than I had realized. Corinne was not just a thief. She was running a one-woman dictatorship in our neighborhood. "Jim, do you know when the next HOA meeting is scheduled?" "Next Tuesday night at the community center, but good luck getting anything on the agenda. Corinne controls that too." I spent the weekend gathering evidence. I took photos of Marcus's garden and documented everything that was missing. I collected written statements from neighbors who had been affected by Corinne's actions. I researched HOA laws and regulations online. What I discovered was that Corinne had been operating outside her authority for months, possibly years. She had no right to enter private property without permission. She had no right to remove or dispose of anything without board approval. And she definitely had no right to collect fees for services that were never provided. But the most damning evidence came from Marcus himself. On Sunday morning, he was playing in the backyard when he made an announcement that changed everything. "Dad, I saw Mrs. Sullivan's daughter at school on Friday. She told everyone that her mom helped her grow vegetables for a project, but Madison does not have any project. She was just bragging about having fresh vegetables for lunch." "Are you sure about that, Marcus?" "Yes, I asked her what kind of project, and she said she was not supposed to talk about it. But then she said her mom told her the vegetables were from a community garden." So Corinne had not even stolen the vegetables for her daughter's school project. She had taken them simply because she wanted them, and she had taught her daughter to lie about where they came from. That night, I made a decision. I was not going to file a complaint through Corinne's controlled HOA process. I was not going to wait for the next meeting where she could manipulate the agenda. I was going to do something that would expose Karen's entire operation to the whole neighborhood. I was going to contact the real HOA board members directly and present my evidence at the next meeting. But first, I needed to make sure I had everything documented properly. I installed security cameras in my backyard, facing the garden. If Karen decided to trespass again, I would have video evidence. I also set up a motion-activated camera near the front of the house, just in case she tried to retaliate. Over the next few days, I prepared a comprehensive report with photos, witness statements, and documentation of Karen's pattern of abuse. I had evidence of theft, trespassing, financial misconduct, and abuse of authority. Karen Sullivan had been operating her own little kingdom in our neighborhood for too long. It was time to expose her to the people who had the real authority to stop her. The HOA meeting was in 3 days. I was ready. I spent the next 3 days building the most comprehensive case I had ever put together. This was not just about my son's vegetables anymore. This was about protecting every family in our neighborhood from Karen's abuse of power. I contacted the HOA management company directly and asked for the contact information of all board members. When I explained that I needed to present evidence of misconduct by an officer, they were surprisingly helpful. It turned out that the management company had been receiving complaints about Karen for months, but they had been told by Karen that all issues had been resolved. "We have been wondering why we never hear from the other board members," the property manager told me. "Usually, we get calls from multiple officers, but with your HOA, everything goes through Mrs. Sullivan." I arranged to meet with Tom Bradley, the HOA president, on Monday evening. Tom was a retired engineer who had been on the board for 6 years. He was shocked when I showed him the documentation of Karen's activities. "I had no idea Karen was doing any of this," Tom said, looking through the evidence. "She told us that she was handling minor maintenance issues and that everything was running smoothly." "Did you authorize her to enter private property?" "Absolutely not. The board has never authorized anyone to enter private property without the owner's permission, and we certainly never authorized anyone to remove or dispose of personal property." Tom was especially concerned about the financial irregularities. "Karen handles all the fee collection, but she is supposed to report to the board monthly. I have not seen a financial report in over 4 months. She has been collecting fees for services that are not being provided." "It looks that way. According to your documentation, she has been charging people for violations that do not exist and for services that are not being performed." Tom agreed to bring the other board members together for an emergency meeting before the regular monthly meeting. He also agreed to take control of the meeting agenda so that Karen could not manipulate the discussion. Meanwhile, I continued gathering evidence. I drove through the neighborhood with a camera, documenting all the properties that Karen had allegedly maintained. What I found was revealing. Trees that Karen claimed to have trimmed were actually untrimmed. Sidewalks that she said she had cleaned were still dirty. Violations that she said she had addressed were still present. But the most damaging evidence came from my security cameras. On Tuesday morning, I caught Karen in my backyard again. This time, she was not stealing vegetables. She was pouring something on the remaining plants. I watched the footage in disbelief. Karen was deliberately damaging Marcus's garden with what looked like salt water. She was destroying the evidence of her theft by killing the plants. I immediately called Tom Bradley and asked him to come over to see the footage. When Tom saw the video, his face turned red with anger. "This is criminal behavior," Tom said. She is trespassing on your property and destroying your son's project. I want to show this to the police, but I also want to present it to the neighborhood at tonight's meeting. Absolutely. The board needs to see this, and the community needs to know what Karen has been doing. I spent Tuesday afternoon preparing my presentation. I organized the evidence into categories: theft, trespassing, financial misconduct, abuse of authority, and intimidation. I had photos, videos, witness statements, and documentation for every accusation. Marcus helped me set up the presentation materials. He did not fully understand what was happening, but he knew that we were fighting for his garden and for what was right. "Dad, will Mrs. Sullivan get in trouble for taking my vegetables?" "Yes, son. She is going to get in trouble for taking your vegetables and for hurting other people in our neighborhood." "Good, what she did was wrong." "Yes, Marcus. What she did was very wrong. And that is why we have to speak up when people do wrong things. We have to protect each other." By Tuesday evening, I had everything ready. I had contacted all the neighbors who had been affected by Karen's actions, and several of them agreed to attend the meeting and share their stories. Mrs. Patterson was coming to talk about her rose bushes. Jim Rodriguez was coming to talk about the fake violations and illegal fees. The Nakamura family was coming to talk about how Karen had removed their children's chalk art from their own driveway. As I loaded my evidence into the car, I felt nervous but determined. Karen had gotten away with bullying and stealing from families for too long. Tonight, she was going to face the consequences of her actions. But I also knew that Karen would not go down without a fight. She had manipulated her way out of trouble before, and she would try to do it again. I had to be prepared for her to lie, to make excuses, and to try to turn the situation around on me. The meeting was at 7 o'clock at the community center. I arrived early to set up my presentation and to make sure everything was working properly. Karen arrived at exactly 7 o'clock, looking confident and professional. She had no idea what was about to happen to her. The community center was more crowded than usual for an HOA meeting. Word had gotten around that something important was going to happen, and neighbors who had never attended a meeting before were there to see what was going on. Karen sat in her usual spot at the front table, looking calm and composed. She had her folder of official-looking documents and her notebook for taking minutes. She looked like she was in complete control of the situation. Tom Bradley called the meeting to order and made an announcement that surprised everyone, especially Karen. "Before we begin with our regular agenda, we have a special presentation from David Chen regarding concerns about HOA operations and officer conduct." Karen's face changed immediately. "I was not informed of any special presentation. This is highly irregular. The board has decided that these concerns need to be addressed publicly," Tom said. "Mr. Chen, please proceed." I walked to the front of the room and connected my laptop to the projector. The first slide showed a photo of Marcus's garden before and after Karen's theft. 3 days ago, HOA Vice President Karen Sullivan trespassed on my property and stole vegetables from my 12-year-old son's science project. When I confronted her, she claimed she had HOA authority to take anything she wanted from any property in the neighborhood. Karen stood up immediately. "This is completely false. I was performing my duties as an HOA officer, addressing a community maintenance issue." "Mrs. Sullivan, please sit down," Tom said firmly. "You will have a chance to respond after the presentation." I clicked to the next slide, which showed Karen's fake authorization documents. Karen provided falsified documents to the police, claiming she had authority that she does not possess. According to the real HOA bylaws, no officer has the right to enter private property without permission or to remove personal property without board approval. The room started to buzz with conversation. People were looking at Karen with suspicion and concern. Furthermore, I continued, my investigation has revealed that Karen has been operating outside her authority for months, possibly years. She has been collecting fees for services that are not provided, issuing fake violations, and intimidating residents who question her actions. I showed the evidence systematically. Photos of untrimmed trees that Karen had charged people to trim, documentation of fake violations that she had issued, financial records showing fees collected for services that were never performed. "This is outrageous," Karen said, standing up again. "I have served this community faithfully for 4 years. I will not sit here and listen to these lies and accusations." "Mrs. Sullivan, these are not lies," Tom Bradley said. "The board has reviewed all of this evidence, and we have serious concerns about your conduct." I clicked to the video footage of Karen in my backyard. The room went completely silent as everyone watched Karen pour salt water on Marcus's plants. This video was taken yesterday morning. As you can see, Karen trespassed on my property again and deliberately destroyed my son's garden to cover up her theft. The reaction from the crowd was immediate and angry. People started talking loudly, and several neighbors stood up to point at Karen. "She did the same thing to my roses," Mrs. Patterson called out. "She charged me $50 to trim a tree that was never trimmed," Jim Rodriguez added. "She threatened to fine us for parking in our own driveway," Mrs. Nakamura said. Karen was surrounded by angry neighbors, all sharing their stories of her abuse and theft. Her face was red with anger and embarrassment. "This is a conspiracy," Karen shouted. "These people are trying to destroy my reputation because they do not like being held accountable for their violations." "What violations?" Tom Bradley demanded. "Show us the documentation for these violations." Karen opened her folder and started shuffling through papers, but she could not find anything that supported her claims. Her fake documents were falling apart under scrutiny. "I have all the documentation in my office," she said weakly. "No, you do not," Tom said. "The board has reviewed your files and they are full of fabricated reports and fake violations. You have been operating a personal dictatorship in this neighborhood, and it ends tonight." "You cannot do this to me," Karen said, her voice cracking. "I have done everything for this community. I have sacrificed my time and energy to keep this neighborhood safe and beautiful." "By stealing from children?" I asked. "By lying to the police? By intimidating families who just want to live in peace?" Karen looked around the room and saw nothing but angry faces. Her support was gone, her authority was gone, and her lies were exposed. "I am resigning from the board," she said suddenly. "I will not be part of this witch hunt." "You are not resigning," Tom Bradley said. "You are being removed from office for misconduct, and the board is recommending that criminal charges be filed for theft and fraud." Karen gathered her papers and rushed toward the door, but the crowd was not finished with her. Neighbors followed her out, sharing more stories of her abuse and demanding answers. I stayed behind to answer questions and provide copies of my evidence to anyone who wanted them. The atmosphere in the room had completely changed. People were talking to each other, sharing their experiences, and working together to make sure nothing like this ever happened again. The next morning, I called the police to file a formal complaint against Karen. This time, I had video evidence, witness statements, and documentation of her pattern of criminal behavior. Officer Martinez, who had responded to Corinne's original call, was assigned to the case. "I remember this situation," Officer Martinez said when he arrived at my house. "I have to admit, after reviewing the evidence you have provided, it is clear that we did not get the full story the first time. Corinne is very good at manipulating situations to her advantage." "Not anymore. Based on this evidence, we are filing charges for theft, trespassing, and fraud. The district attorney is also looking into the financial irregularities you have documented." Within a week, Corinne was facing criminal charges on multiple counts. The HOA board conducted a formal audit of her activities and discovered over $3,000 in missing fees and fraudulent charges. The board voted unanimously to pursue restitution from Corinne and to implement new oversight procedures to prevent future abuse. But the best news came from Marcus's school. When his teacher heard about what had happened, she arranged for Marcus to present his garden project to the entire school as an example of perseverance and dedication. Marcus won first place in the science fair, not just for his vegetables, but for his documentation of the entire experience, including the theft and recovery. "Dad, I learned something important from this project," Marcus told me after the science fair. "I learned that bad people sometimes try to take things that do not belong to them, but good people will help you fight back." "That is exactly right, son. And you also learned that hard work and patience pay off in the end." We replanted Marcus's garden, this time with security cameras and the full support of our neighbors. Mrs. Patterson donated some of her prize-winning rose cuttings. Jim Rodriguez helped build a small fence around the garden. The Nakamura family contributed seeds from their own garden. The neighborhood changed after Corinne's exposure. People started talking to each other more. They started looking out for each other's families and properties. The HOA board implemented new transparency measures, including public financial reports and open access to all board communications. Corinne and her family moved away from the neighborhood within a month. They could not face the consequences of her actions or the judgment of their former neighbors. Her house sold quickly, and a nice family with 2 young children moved in. The new HOA board asked me to serve as the compliance officer, but I declined. I had learned that the best way to prevent abuse of power is to stay involved and stay informed, but not to become part of the system that can be corrupted. Marcus's garden thrived that summer. He grew tomatoes, peppers, herbs, and flowers. He shared his vegetables with neighbors and taught other children in the neighborhood how to grow their own gardens. Most importantly, Marcus learned that standing up to bullies and fighting for what is right is not always easy, but it is always worth it. He learned that communities are stronger when people look out for each other and refuse to let bad people get away with hurting others. And I learned that sometimes the most important battles are fought not with lawyers or police, but with evidence, patience, and the support of good neighbors who refuse to let injustice stand. Corinne thought she could steal from my son and get away with it. She was wrong.